Imagine moving into your dream home, only to have the HOA demand you give up the lake in your own backyard. That's exactly what happened to Marcus. But what they didn't know was that he secretly controlled every single dock they relied on. And when he revealed the truth, the entire neighborhood turned upside down. You're watching Brain Fuel, where unbelievable true stories come to life. If you love tales of power, twist, and justice served in the most unexpected ways, then hit that subscribe button and join our community. Because here, every story will leave you thinking, what would I do if this happened to me? Give us your lake. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. He stood at the front door of his brand new home, his heart still swelling with pride from finally moving his family into what he thought would be their peaceful dream neighborhood. And now, barely a week after unpacking boxes, 3 members of the Homeowners Association stood on his porch demanding something that sounded utterly ridiculous. Marcus had worked hard for this home, born and raised in a small town where opportunities were scarce. He had always been told that men like him would never make it big. But Marcus wasn't one to listen to limitations. He pushed himself in school, earned a scholarship, and eventually built a career as an engineer. For nearly 2 decades, he saved every extra penny, skipped vacations, and invested smartly with one goal in mind: owning a home that not only represented success, but also gave his family a place of peace, far away from the noise and chaos of city life. When he found this property, it felt like fate. The house itself was beautiful, but the crown jewel was the lake that stretched out behind it. It wasn't massive like the lakes you'd see in travel magazines, but it was large enough for boating, fishing, and peaceful evenings by the water. Ducks often glided across the surface at sunrise, and in the evenings, the reflection of the sky painted the lake in shades of orange and pink. To Marcus, it wasn't just water. It was tranquility. It was freedom. He could already imagine his children learning how to fish from the wooden dock, his wife sipping coffee on the porch while looking out over the water, and family barbecues where the lake became the perfect backdrop. It was more than a property. It was a dream realized. So when the HOA president, a man named Richard with slick back hair and an air of superiority, stood on his doorstep with 2 board members and said, "We believe the lake should belong to the community, so you'll need to sign it over," Marcus was stunned. At first, he thought it was a joke. He even let out a small laugh, waiting for the smirks to follow. But the 3 faces staring back at him weren't laughing. Their expressions were stone serious, almost smug. "Excuse me?" Marcus asked, adjusting his glasses. Richard cleared his throat, holding a clipboard like he was a final authority on the matter. "The lake has always been used by the community. We've had neighborhood barbecues by it. Children have swum in it, and several residents have docks on the shore. It only makes sense that the HOA manages it officially. If you'll just sign this transfer, everything will remain simple." Marcus blinked. Transfer? He hadn't even finished unpacking his garage, and already these people were asking him to give away the very reason he bought the house. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus said politely, though his voice carried an edge. "The property deed is very clear. The lake belongs to this house. I own it now." One of the board members, an older woman with sharp eyes, crossed her arms. "Ownership doesn't mean much if it disrupts the harmony of the community. Everyone has always shared it. That's how it works here." The way she said, "That's how it works here," rubbed Marcus the wrong way. It wasn't just the words, but the tone, condescending, as if he was an outsider being lectured on rules he didn't understand. Still, Marcus kept his cool. "I respect the community traditions," he said slowly, "but legally, this lake is mine. My family and I will decide how it's used." Richard's smile thinned into a tight line. He tapped his pen against the clipboard. "We're trying to help you fit in, Marcus. It would be easier for everyone if you just cooperated." That word, cooperated, hung in the air like a threat disguised as advice. Marcus looked at the 3 people standing on his porch and realized this wasn't a friendly suggestion. This was a demand. They weren't asking for permission. They were expecting compliance. The arrogance in their eyes told him that they were used to getting their way. As the HOA group left that day, muttering about community spirit and difficult newcomers, Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the breeze drifting off the lake. This was supposed to be a new beginning for his family. Instead, It seemed he had just stepped into a quiet war. Later that evening, Marcus sat on his back porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. His children laughed as they chased fireflies, and his wife sat beside him, worry etched on her face. "They really told you to give it up?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "They think I'll just hand it over. Like I didn't spend years working for this. Like it doesn't even matter that my name is on the deed." His wife placed a hand on his arm. "They don't know you." Marcus's eyes hardened as he looked out over the lake, the water glowing in the twilight. He had dealt with prejudice before. He had faced down people who thought they could push him aside because of the color of his skin or because he wasn't part of their circle. But if there was one thing Marcus had learned in life, it was this. When you work hard for something, you don't let anyone take it from you. That night, as frogs croaked and the last of the light faded, Marcus made a silent promise to himself. He wasn't just going to protect his property. He was going to stand up to anyone who thought they could bully him into giving it away. Because this lake wasn't just a body of water. It was proof of everything he had overcome. And no HOA, no matter how entitled, was going to strip that away. The very next morning after their first encounter, Marcus found an envelope tucked under his front door. At first, he thought it might be a simple welcome letter from the HOA, but when he tore it open, his stomach tightened. It was not a friendly message. It was a formal notice, written in stiff, legal-sounding language, demanding that he reconsider transferring ownership of the lake to Homeowners Association for the good of the community. The words dripped with authority, but Marcus could read between the lines. This wasn't a suggestion, it was pressure. They wanted him to feel isolated, cornered, and forced into compliance. As he sat at his kitchen table, rereading the letter, his wife shook her head. "They really think they can just bully you into giving it up?" Marcus exhaled, folding the letter carefully. "It's not about the lake. Not really. It's about control. They don't like that I have something they can't boss around." Over the next week, the HOA's mask of politeness slipped further. The neighbors who had smiled politely when Marcus first moved in suddenly seemed distant. The joggers who used to wave as they passed his driveway now looked straight ahead, avoiding eye contact. Parents at the nearby playground whispered to one another, while casting sideways glances at Marcus's kids. The change was subtle, but it was undeniable. It was as if the HOA had quietly sent out a message to the entire neighborhood. This man doesn't belong here. A few days later, Marcus decided to attend his first HOA meeting, partly out of curiosity, partly to show he was intimidated. The meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse, a pristine building decorated with framed photos of past HOA presidents, every single one of them white, grinning in front of neatly trimmed lawns. When Marcus entered the room, conversations hushed. He could feel the weight of eyes on him. He took a seat near the back, calmly folding his hands, but he could sense the discomfort rippling through the crowd. The HOA president, Richard, stood at the front, pretending to shuffle papers. But when he began speaking, it became clear that tonight's meeting had been orchestrated with Marcus in mind. "Neighbors," Richard said, his voice smooth but condescending, "we've had a long tradition of unity here. Our lake, our parks, our shared spaces, they've always belonged to the community. It keeps us connected. It keeps us safe. But recently, there's been a disruption." All eyes turned toward Marcus. He remained calm, though inside his blood simmered. Richard continued. "One homeowner seems to believe the lake belongs exclusively to him. Now, I won't name names, but I think we can all agree that selfishness is not what this neighborhood is about." Murmurs spread through the room. Marcus clenched his jaw, but stayed silent. He knew better than to rise debate in a room full of people already convinced he was the villain. Then an older man stood up. "That lake's been for all of us since I bought here 20 years ago. My grandkids swim in it every summer. We're not going to just let someone take it away." A woman chimed in, "It's about fairness. If he keeps the lake, what's next? Gates? Fees? What kind of community is that?" Marcus raised his hand slowly. "With respect," he said firmly, "I'm not here to take anything away. I bought this property legally. The deed makes it clear the lake belongs to my home. I respect traditions, but traditions don't override the law." Richard's smile was thin, his eyes sharp. Sometimes the law doesn't see what's best for the community. That sentence hung in the air like a warning. Marcus knew then that this wasn't just about the lake. The HOA had decided he was a problem they would keep pushing until he either gave in or broke. The hostility only grew from there. Small infractions Marcus never noticed before suddenly appeared in his mailbox as violation notices. His trash can, they said, was 2 inches too close to the curb. His grass, though freshly mowed, was slightly uneven. Even the paint on his mailbox, installed just weeks earlier by the moving company, was non-compliant with HOA guidelines. It became clear they were trying to wear him down, bury him in rules and fines until he surrendered. But what stung more than the letters were the looks. At the grocery store, he overheard 2 neighbors whispering, "Why can't he just follow the rules like everyone else?" Another time, as he walked with his daughter around the lake, a boy pointed and said, "That's the man who won't share." Marcus's daughter looked up at him with wide eyes, confused. "Daddy, why don't they like us?" His chest tightened. He had faced prejudice before, in school, at work, even at stores where strangers questioned why he was in certain neighborhoods. But this was different. This was his home, the place he dreamed of as a sanctuary for his family. And they were already trying to make it feel like a battlefield. That night, Marcus sat by the lake alone, staring at the moon's reflection rippling across the water. He knew the HOA wasn't finished. Their letters, their whispers, their meetings, it was all part of a bigger strategy. They thought they could intimidate him, push him out, or scare him into surrender. But Marcus wasn't going anywhere. The lake wasn't just water and land. It was his dream, his investment, his hard work, his family's future. And if the HOA wanted to play dirty, Marcus was ready to fight with the truth on his side. Because deep down, he suspected something they didn't want to admit. They had been using his lake without legal rights for years. And if they kept pushing, they were about to learn just how much power Marcus really held. After weeks of subtle hostility, Marcus decided it was time to stop reacting and start investigating. He had been receiving too many violation letters and veiled threats, and the way the HOA kept talking about the lake made him suspicious. If they wanted it so badly, there had to be more to the story than just tradition. One Saturday morning, after sending his kids to play in the yard, Marcus sat down at his kitchen table with his laptop, property deed, and a steaming cup of coffee. He wasn't just going to skim this time. He was going to dig. The original documents were clear. The lake and all the land around it, including a 20-foot shoreline buffer, belonged entirely to the property he had purchased. That meant no matter how many community traditions existed, legally it was his private land. But the real surprise came when he looked at the old survey maps from the county clerk's office. He zoomed in on the lines and nearly laughed out loud. The HOA's prize boat docks, the ones neighbors bragged about, the ones they used for their jet skis, fishing boats, and even parties, weren't on community property at all. They sat directly on his shoreline, extending into his lake. In other words, the HOA had built its docks on private property, without permission, and had been doing so for years. Marcus leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. The very people accusing him of being selfish were, in fact, trespassing every single day. Every dock nail, every boat tied up, every party thrown on those wooden planks had been illegal. And yet, they had the audacity to demand that he give them the lake? Marcus knew he couldn't keep this discovery to himself. He needed confirmation. So he called a lawyer, a friend of a friend who specialized in real estate. After emailing copies of the deed and survey maps, Marcus waited nervously for a response. The lawyer didn't take long. "Marcus," she said over the phone, "you're absolutely right. The lake and the shoreline are yours. And from what I can see, those docks are a liability nightmare. Technically, if someone fell off them and got hurt, you'd be the one responsible since they're on your property." Marcus's eyes widened. "Wait, you're saying I could get sued if something happens on their docks?" "Exactly," the lawyer confirmed, "which is why you're well within your rights to either demand they remove them or set up legal agreements for their use. Right now, they've been using your property without permission. Honestly, it's you who should be upset, not them." That phone call flipped Marcus's entire perspective. The HOA wasn't the powerful force they pretended to be. They were exposed, vulnerable, and desperate to cover up the fact that they had no legal authority over the lake. Suddenly, Marcus remembered all the smug comments, the threats, the whispers about tradition. It was all smoke and mirrors. They weren't confident. They were scared. Because deep down, they knew the truth. The one man they had underestimated, the man they thought they could bully, was the one who held all the power. That evening, Marcus walked along the shoreline, his shoes crunching against a gravel path. He stopped by the largest dock, where two neighbors had left their boats tied up. The dock creaked under the weight of the water and wood, its posts sinking slightly into the mud. He imagined how furious they'd be when they realized the space wasn't theirs to use freely anymore. For the first time since moving in, Marcus smiled, not because he wanted revenge, but because he finally understood the game. The HOA thought they were in control, but the truth was the exact opposite. Still, Marcus wasn't naive. He knew revealing his discovery too soon could backfire. The HOA was already paying him as the difficult outsider. If he came in too aggressively, they'd twist the story further, turning more neighbors against him. So Marcus decided to be strategic. He would let them keep digging their own hole with threats and demands. And when the time was right, he would reveal the truth, not as a weapon of revenge, but as a shield to protect his family and their future. The very next HOA letter only confirmed his suspicions. This time, they accused him of endangering community safety by not allowing the HOA to manage the lake. They claimed that without their oversight, accidents could happen and the neighborhood could be at risk. Marcus laughed bitterly when he read that line. At risk? The only reason the neighborhood was at risk was because the HOA had illegally built docks on land that wasn't theirs. If anything, he had been carrying the liability all along. That night, Marcus gathered his family on the porch. The children were confused by all the tension, but Marcus believed in being honest. Listen, he told them gently. Some people here don't want us to feel welcome. They think they can tell us what to do with our own home. But here's the truth. They don't have the power they think they do. We do. This lake, this land, it's ours. And we're going to protect it together. His wife smiled proudly. So what's next? Marcus looked out at the shimmering water, calm but firm. Next, we stop letting them intimidate us. We've got the law, the deed, and the truth on our side. They think they're in charge, but they're about to find out who really controls this lake. In that moment, something shifted inside Marcus. He no longer felt like the outsider in the neighborhood. The lake wasn't just a piece of land. It was leverage, a shield, a reminder of everything he had worked for. And when the time came to confront the HOA, Marcus knew he'd be ready. Because the docks they thought gave them power were the very thing that made them weak. The HOA thought they had Marcus cornered. After weeks of sending him threatening letters, stacking fines, and spreading rumors around the neighborhood, they believed he would eventually cave. But Marcus wasn't the type to surrender, not when the truth was on his side. So when the next HOA meeting rolled around, Marcus decided it was time to strike back. The clubhouse buzzed with chatter that evening. Neighbors crowded into folding chairs, their whispers low but pointed. Some glanced at Marcus as he walked in, clutching a neat folder of documents. He kept his face calm, but inside, adrenaline pulsed like a drum. "Look, that's him," one man whispered. "The guy who won't share the lake." "Selfish," another muttered. Marcus ignored the comments, making his way to a chair near the front. His wife had urged him to stay calm, to let the facts speak louder than his anger. He had promised her he would. At the podium, Richard, the HOA president, adjusted his tie and began the meeting. "Neighbors, thank you for joining us. Tonight, as always, we'll discuss matters of importance to the community. But before we move on, I must address the ongoing disruption." Marcus sat still, his eyes locked on Richard. He knew what was coming. Richard cleared his throat. "As you all know, one homeowner continues to claim that the lake, the very heart of our community, belongs solely to him. We have asked for cooperation, for compromise, but unfortunately, he has refused. This behavior threatens the harmony of our neighborhood." The crowd stirred, nodding in agreement. A woman raised her hand and said, "My family has been swimming in that lake every summer for 15 years. Are you telling me that's suddenly forbidden?" Another man added, "If we let one person control it, what's next? Gates and fees? That's not community living. That's tyranny. The murmurs grew louder. Richard leaned forward, his voice smooth but smug. We must decide whether the board should take legal steps to ensure the lake remains for everyone. That was Marcus's cue. He rose slowly, carrying his folder to the front of the room. The crowd fell silent as he took the microphone. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, Marcus began, his voice steady. But since my name is being dragged to the mud again, I think it's time everyone hears the full truth. Richard frowned. Mr. Johnson, this isn't... Marcus held up a hand. You've had your turn. Now it's mine. The room quieted. Marcus opened his folder and pulled out the property deed. He raised it high so everyone could see the embossed seal at the bottom. This, he said firmly, is my deed. It clearly states that the lake, the shoreline, and everything attached to it belong to my property. Not the HOA. Not the community. Me, I bought it. I own it. That's the law. Gasps rippled through the room. Some neighbors leaned forward, squinting to see the paper. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. Now, here's the part none of you seem to know. Or maybe the HOA didn't want you to know. Those docks you've been using for years? The ones where you tie up your boats and throw parties? They're sitting on my land. Every nail, every plank, every board is on private property. My property. The crowd erupted in whispers. A man in the back stood, his face pale. Wait, are you saying we've been trespassing? That's exactly what I'm saying, Marcus replied. And here's the kicker. Because the HOA never had the legal right to build on my land, every time someone uses those docks, I'm the one carrying the liability. If someone fell, if a child got hurt, if a boat was damaged, it would be me, not the HOA, getting sued. They've been using me to shield themselves this whole time. The room went silent. Richard's face turned red, his jaw tight. That's absurd. Those docks have always been for the community. Marcus cut him off. Tradition doesn't override the law, Richard, and I have the paperwork to prove it. He pulled out copies of the county survey maps and held them up. These maps show the boundary lines. See this? That's the shoreline. That's the dock. All of it on my property. Neighbors craned their necks to see, some whispering angrily at Richard. So, Marcus said, his tone cold but controlled, from this day forward, the free ride is over. If you want to keep using the docks, we're going to do it the right way. Legal agreements, clear rules, maintenance fees, or the docks come down. The crowd erupted again, some in protest, others in shock. One woman shouted, You can't do this. Marcus turned to her calmly. I already am. For a moment, no one spoke. Then an elderly neighbor, who had been quiet the whole time, stood slowly. His voice was gravelly but clear. If what he says is true, then we've been lied to. The HOA has been using his property without permission, and now they're trying to bully him into handing it over. That's not right. The murmurs shifted. Instead of angry whispers against Marcus, the room turned toward Richard and the board. People wanted answers. Richard stammered, his smooth confidence cracking. This is complicated. We'll need to review. Marcus stepped closer to the podium, his eyes locked on Richard's. No, Richard. It's simple. You've been trespassing. You've been lying. And now, everyone knows the truth. The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time since moving in, Marcus didn't feel like the outsider being judged. He felt like the man holding all the cards. He packed up his papers and returned to his seat, his head high. He didn't need applause or cheers. The look on the neighbors' faces, the shock, the doubt, the dawning realization was victory enough. The HOA had wanted to paint him as selfish. Instead, he had exposed them as frauds. And Marcus knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. The night of the HOA meeting ended in stunned silence, but Marcus knew the battle wasn't over. The next morning, as the sun rose over the lake, he sat on the porch sipping coffee and bracing himself. He had exposed the truth in front of everyone. But the HOA wouldn't just walk away quietly. People like Richard didn't surrender power without a fight. And sure enough, within 2 days, Another letter arrived. This one wasn't the usual passive-aggressive compliance notice. It was bold, stamped with official HOA letterhead, and filled with threats. They accused Marcus of damaging community spirit, of endangering neighborhood safety, and even hinted at taking the court if he didn't relinquish ownership of the lake. Marcus read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it on the counter. For the first time, he wasn't angry. He almost smiled. Because the letter wasn't power, it was desperation. They were grasping at straws, trying to intimidate him one last time. But Marcus had something they didn't: the law, the deed, and the truth. That evening, he met with his lawyer again. She reviewed the letter, laughed out loud, and shook her head. This isn't a legal threat, Marcus. It's a bluff. They don't have a leg to stand on. If anything, they should be terrified you'll sue them for trespassing and damages. Marcus leaned back, relieved. So they can't take the lake? Not a chance, she said firmly. The court would laugh them out of the room. If they keep harassing you, we'll file a cease and desist. And if you want, we can go further. Demand they remove the docks entirely. For a moment, Marcus imagined the shoreline stripped bare, every dock dismantled, every neighbor forced to face the reality that their beloved gathering place had never belonged to them. He had every right to do it. But he also knew that ripping it all away in one swoop would only poison the air more. He didn't want war. He wanted respect. So Marcus came up with a plan, not to punish, but to take back control on his own terms. At the following HOA meeting, Marcus stood again, but this time his tone was calm, almost businesslike. I've spoken with my lawyer, he announced. Here's what's going to happen. The lake and shoreline are mine, and that's not changing. But I recognize that many of you have used it for years, and I don't want to stop families from enjoying it. So I'm offering a solution: legal agreements for dock use. You'll sign leases, pay modest maintenance fees, and follow the rules I set. In return, you keep your access. Fair, clear, and above board. The room buzzed with mixed reactions. Some neighbors looked relieved. It wasn't the nightmare they feared. Others frowned, bristling at the idea of paying fees for something they'd always assumed was free. Richard, of course, was furious. His face reddened, his fists clenched on the table. This is outrageous. You're trying to profit off your neighbors. Marcus met his glare coolly. No, Richard, I'm protecting myself. For years, the HOA has let people trespass on my property without permission. If I wanted to, I could shut it all down tomorrow. But I'm choosing compromise. You should be thanking me. For once, Richard had no comeback. Over the next few weeks, word spread. Some neighbors grumbled, but many quietly approached Marcus, asking about the new agreements. They weren't happy about paying, but they understood. Deep down, they knew the truth. Marcus was being more generous than he had to be. The power dynamic shifted. The same people who once avoided Marcus now knocked on his door, papers in hand, ready to sign. Families who had glared at him now softened, realizing he wasn't the villain the HOA had painted him to be. He wasn't trying to take the lake away. He was simply protecting what was his. And Richard? His grip on the neighborhood slipped. Without the lake to rally around, his speeches about community tradition rang hollow. People began questioning his leadership. Some even whispered about replacing him at the next election. For Marcus, the sweetest victory wasn't in seeing Richard stumble. It was in watching his children run down to the dock on a summer morning, their laughter echoing across the water, free and unbothered. It was in sipping coffee with his wife as the sun set over the lake, knowing no one could take this view from them. He hadn't just defended his property. He had defended his dignity, his family, and his right to belong. Weeks later, one of his neighbors, the elderly man who had spoken up during the meeting, stopped by. He shook Marcus's hand firmly and said, I've lived here a long time, son. I've seen this HOA push people around. But you stood your ground. Don't let anyone tell you you don't belong here. You've earned every inch of that lake. Marcus smiled, feeling the weight of the struggle finally lift. Thank you, he replied. I didn't move here to fight, but I won't let anyone bully me out of what I've worked for. And that was the lesson the entire neighborhood learned. The HOA had tried to intimidate him, isolate him, and control him. But in the end, they had only revealed their own weakness. Marcus hadn't just defended a lake. He had turned the tables, showing everyone that sometimes the one person you underestimate is the one holding all the power. The HOA's demands had backfired spectacularly, and now, whenever the sun set over the water, painting the sky in fiery colors, Marcus knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was his lake, his dream, his victory. No HOA could ever take that away.